Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Female Founders Alliance Forum with my friend Tiffany Dufu. I'm going to introduce you with all the bells and whistles in just a moment. I think that people are starting to trickle online. How are we doing on attendance over here? Wow, okay, so they're trickling in fast. Welcome, everybody. I'm Leslie Feinstein. I'm the founder and CEO of the Female Founders Alliance. We are a network of founders, investors, partners, supporters, nationally that collaborate to help women and non-binary startup leaders succeed. We offer programming, community, incubation, deal flow, and investment opportunities for our investors to increase the number of successful founders 20 times over in 10 years or less. Or as I like to think about it, to have 50-50 representation at the top levels of business leadership by the time my daughters graduate from college. And I hope that Tiffany will be one of them. So once a month, we run these online forums with people that inspire us and whose experience can help our founders succeed better. And today we have a super, super special guest that my entire team has been fangirling over for a long time. And I personally was very touched even before I knew her by reading her book, because I think that like every woman that has a difficult juggling life would really, really benefit from reading Drop the Ball. So let me introduce you properly. We have Tiffany Dufu, who is one of the 0.0006%. That is the percentage of venture capital that is invested in Black women founders. That's only 42. She's going to tell us a lot more about that. She is the founder and CEO of The Cru, a peer coaching service for women looking to accelerate their professional and personal growth. She is the author of the best-selling book, Drop the Ball, Achieving More by Doing Less, called an important, path-breaking, intimate, and brave account by none other than Gloria Steinem, which is amazing. Tiffany has been named to Fast Company's League of Extraordinary Women. She's raised nearly $20 million to the cause of women and girls. She was a launch team member to Lean In, Chief Leadership Officer to Levo, President of the White House Project, a Major Gifts Officer at Simmons University, and Associate Director of Development at Seattle Girls School. So as we like to think about it, Tiffany has dedicated her entire life to improving leadership opportunities for women and girls around the country and around the world, and it is our honor to have you. So welcome, Tiffany. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm doing awesome. And that was such a great introduction. You know, on some days, like honestly today, I put on my Cru t-shirt because I felt like I wanted to represent, but it's like I've got on my Ugg boots and a pair of jeans, and, you know, I've had a couple of red eyes this week, and it's just one of those founder days. It's just so nice to get on this webinar and to hear you say all of those things about me and to be sitting here thinking, you're amazing.
No.
You're really amazing. So thank you for that.
Good. Well, it's so important to remember, right, to have somebody reflect back to us all of the things that we've done and we forget about.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that we're doing that for you today, because you certainly deserve it.
Yes.
No,
Yes, a huge
I wanted to make sure I didn't skip any part of it, because it's really important to show just what an incredible background you have, right? Like, you've accomplished some major things in your life, and now you're working on your company, The Cru, which is a little bit of an extension of what you've naturally been building this whole time. So why don't you tell us about The Cru, and what does it do, and why did you start it?
Yeah, so as you could tell, my life's work is advancing women and girls. It's pretty much why I'm on the planet. And it's also why I feel really honored to be here, because I learned about Female Founders Alliance earlier this year, and like immediately signed up and was like, I want to be a part of this community that's all about building leadership and wealth and power for women. It's not lost on me that today we're doing this when Forbes has just announced their annual list of 100 most powerful women, which we can also talk about because I have some issues with that list.
Oh, I saw your post earlier today.
Yeah.
It's not in my question guide, but I was going to pop that on you.
Okay. On that, but I've done a ton of things, you know, as you just cited, to try to build a world where women and girls' ingenuity and our talent and our creativity can be harnessed for the benefit of everyone. And so from my perspective, I've been doing the same thing my entire career. But I've worked in different industries and I've obviously had different jobs. One of the most important things that I've ever done, though, Leslie, is just say yes to a lot of women. So for many years, from early 2012 to actually just this summer, when our COO at The Cru was like, you can't do this anymore, I basically have met with every woman that reached out to me. Like, you could ping me, DM me on Twitter or LinkedIn and say, I want to connect with you. And I'm like, sure. And I would meet with women for 7 years on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9, 10, and 11 a.m. Sometimes I would take a meeting on Friday and I would just listen to women's stories. And if they had questions for me, I would try to just ask them questions back to help them to achieve their own clarity through guidance and encouragement. That's what I feel like I'm here to do. And it turns out that turned out to be really incredible market research for whatever I was going to build later. But at the time, I didn't know. During the course of that journey, I have made a number of observations about women. And one of those observations led to The Cru, which is that even though we often have a lot of people around us, our family, our friends, coworkers, we largely perceive our personal and professional journeys as if they're solo endeavors, not a team sport. In other words, if we have a problem, the first question that we ask ourselves is, how am I going to solve this problem? When I feel like the more important question is always, who is going to help me solve this problem? And so I had been evangelizing this idea of The Cru because what you're looking at right now is the cumulative investment of a lot of people, especially women who have poured themselves into me. And I have a group of 9 other women who we collaborate together on our ambitions, our goals. We hold one another accountable. And I just thought every woman should have a Cru. So I kind of came up with my Cru pep talk. For probably the past 3 years, I've given this Cru pep talk at the end of all of my meetings with women. And it wasn't until last January, so January of 2018, I was giving my Cru pep talk. I was sitting at one of those beautiful women's collaborative spaces with all the pink walls. And I could tell that she just wasn't feeling me as I was giving her my Cru pep talk. And I asked her what was wrong. And she said, Tiffany, I understand theoretically this idea of a Cru. And I believe that if I had a group of people like this, they could help me move my life forward. But honestly, by the time I go to enough cocktail parties, conferences, events, like figure out how I'm going to pay for all of these things, like awkwardly introduce myself to a bunch of strangers, put a bunch of business cards in my bag that are probably going to sit in the bottom of it or in a desk drawer, even if I could take out all the cards and schedule all the coffees and the teas and the lunches, I'm then supposed to have all of these conversations to figure out who I'm compatible with and who I could help. They could help me. And then you want me to curate a group of 10 or 12 of them to have quarterly gatherings and put forth our ambitions together. I'm exhausted, Tiffany, just thinking about everything that would go into me finding my Cru. And by the way, I have a full-time job. I have 3 kids. I have a mom with a diagnosis and a commute and a dog. And I think that what you're asking me to do is a lot. It's not helpful. I came to you because I was already overwhelmed and stressed, and I just feel more stressed, now. And that was one of what I call a Tiffany's epiphany moment, where I had to kind of take a step back and realize that she was right. She was making a really incredible point, and that if my life's work really was advancing women and girls, that I should probably stop preaching to women about how you need to find your Cru, and I should just find the damn Cru. I should just find every woman I possibly can a Cru. And that's how this company was born, was recognizing that there was a need, recognizing that there was probably a way for me to address that need, and that I was probably the most well-positioned person to be called to do it. And that was the infancy of why I started the platform. It works very simply. You apply to become a member of The Cru, and our algorithm matches you with 9 other women in your city based on your personality, your values, your demographics, your goals. The 10 of you then become a crew and you collaborate to meet your life goals together. We're very clear about what those are. So you establish what we call intentions. You upload them into our portal along with actions against them. And your crew is essentially your accountability partner.
That is absolutely just amazing. And one thing that I want to kind of draw out of you a little bit more is, why did you decide to build a venture scale company specifically? Because you could have taken a number of different paths to this, right? Like you could have become an executive coach. So what was the decision to go big? Like, how did you think about it and how did you make that decision?
I'm so glad you're asking that question, because the honest answer is that I didn't make a decision to launch a venture-backed company. I made a decision to solve a big problem for a group of people that I care deeply about, Leslie. That's what I did, okay? And along the way, once they responded, so once what, venture capitalists would call traction started to happen. By the way, I didn't know that was called traction, okay? But once I realized that I had developed, or that I had created at least the idea of a solution that women would want. And my proof for that was, we're going to do a membership model. In other words, there's going to be a membership fee. I made it $499 a year. You applied to the Cru and you paid the $499 before you met the members of your crew. So for me, it was, do they want this bad enough that they're going to pay me $499 to match them and then subsequently to provide content and ensure that there's a framework and that it's a wonderful experience? And once I realized that the answer was yes, and I couldn't stop the funnel, I actually technically didn't know how to turn off the apply button very, very early on once women started applying. And once I had already done a ton of interviews, we had matched the first cohort and women had just kept applying. And I had over 1,000 women on this waiting list for this thing called the Cru, is when I decided, whoa, I don't have enough money. I don't have enough resources to meet the demand of this group of people who I believe deserve a Cru. And so I'm going to have to figure out how to close that gap. And that's when I started doing the research to figure out what are the best ways for me to continue to support these women and to also feed my family and find some kind of level of sustainability. And that's what led me down the path of raising venture capital.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because, we know that it's hard for everyone, but less discussed is how specifically much, much harder it is for women of color and for Black women specifically, right? We named the forum raising as a 0.00006%, lightheartedly, but it's not lighthearted at all. It's a very, very real difference. So tell us, let's just start with, how did you navigate it? How did you go about it?
Yes. Yeah. So the first way that I navigated it was by studying the process. So while I had never done something like this before, I do have a lot of experience hitting it out of the ballpark on things I've never done before. Okay. So I had that. And I basically have a formula, which is learn, like, what is the process? Largely for me, what I was obsessed with was what drives investor decision making. Why do they make the decisions that they do, and what informs that in terms of who they're going to invest in? And if I can figure that part out, then I'll begin to have an entry point. Well, very quickly, I realized from doing things like binge listening to an entire season of the Pitch podcast, reading books like Venture Deals, Burn the Business Plan. I subscribed to Fortune's term sheet and started reading that every day. I mean, once you kind of start to immerse yourself, a few things became very clear. One was, Tiffany, you don't have the network to be able to raise this money. Half these people only want to talk to people who they have some kind of in with or they have some kind of introduction to. So you'd better figure out how you're going to add some people who they know in your crew. Okay, in order for this to work. Secondly, I discovered, especially through this podcast called The Pitch, which I just cannot recommend highly enough, that likability was this huge factor. It was really crazy to me. It was this, if you're not familiar with this podcast, basically it's a podcast where real founders pitch to real VCs. You get an opportunity to hear the pitch. Then you get an opportunity to hear the conversation because they keep the audio going with the VCs after the founder leaves, which is very enlightening. And then they follow up with the founder later, a few months later, to find out how did it go. And I discovered that likability was a huge piece of this. I was shocked at the number of VCs who, after a founder left the room, wanted to have a whole conversation about whether or not they liked the person. And I kind of got that, this is a storyteller's game. Like, really, you need to be a phenomenal salesperson to be able to really raise this money. So if I can combine that with getting access to the people who can give me an entry point, I think I'll be able to at least get to the next step, which is just the meetings and learning from these meetings what's going on with the crew and how they're responding to the crew. So I had to recruit a couple of sponsors, Leslie. To be really specific, I felt that I needed someone in my network that fit a particular profile. I felt that I needed someone who was a man, who was white, who had spent some time in Silicon Valley, either as a builder or an operator with at least one brand, that like tech brand that everybody was going to know about, who was in some kind of transition, because I felt like, well, they got to have some time on their hands to kind of take me on, and who likely would be able to see me. In other words, they probably in their life had some kind of experience with otherness, or they were sensitized, or they had some level of cultural competency that, particularly as a Black female founder, I wouldn't have to do much explaining, about who I was. And I asked around. You would have thought I was looking for a husband. I'm a straight woman. For a good 3 weeks, people would be like, do you want to come to this like female, empowerment luncheon? I'm like, are there going to be men there? Like, no. I'm like, no, I'm looking for the white dude who was, at this. And every time someone would ask me, how can I help you? What are you working on right now? I would give them this profile. And that's how I met this really incredible man named Evan Cohen. Because I gave this profile to so many people, and eventually someone said, I actually know somebody like that. He used to be like the COO of Foursquare, then he went to Lyft. He's just moved back to New York. He's in transition. He's Jewish. Like, this is great, And so Evan did two things for me during the process. I recruited him to be my sponsor. He made introductions, which was great and which is really helpful to have in the process. But the most important thing that he actually did was demystify the process itself. So it's very helpful to have someone who, when you come out of a meeting, for example, you can call and they can say, what did they ask you? And you can say, this is what they asked. And Evan would say, well, what did you say? And I would explain what I said. And then he would tell me what was happening, especially in those meetings where I was getting really excited and I would come out thinking, oh, this is the perfect investor. They're definitely investing. And then he would ask all of his questions and he would say, actually, Tiffany, you got to move on. Like, they're not investing. And I would say, why? And he would say, well, right now they're raising money from LPs. And I'd be like, well, what are LPs? And, he would say, listen, they're not going to be rude to you. You're, a founder, and they need to be nice and maintain the relationship, but they're not even in a position to invest right now because of where they are with their round and with their fund. So just know that and kind of keep it moving. So I give that as just one example, but it's really finding other people who can support you in the process was a really important part of it for me, because I was new. I was a newbie.
Is there anything that you wish you had known in the beginning prior to going into that process? Did anything surprise you for the better or for the worse?
Lots of things surprised me. Probably the biggest thing that surprised me was the psychological impact of rejection. And it surprised me because I've had professional experiences in which I've had rejection. So, for example, one of my first jobs out of college was as a telemarketer. Lots of rejection. I spent many years of my career as a nonprofit fundraiser. I got rejection, but this is a specific kind of rejection when you're raising venture capital at the early stages of a company, because at the end of the day, there's not that much there except you as a founder. And people are largely investing in you and their bet on whether or not they think that you can pull it off. At the end of the day, you might have some amazing technology. You might have a bit of traction the way that we did with the Cru. But at the end of the day, they're investing in you. And so when someone passes, when someone doesn't invest, it really truly feels like a personal assault on you. And when that happens over and over and over and over again, you begin to think that you're crazy. You are having to manage a lot of self-doubt. You begin to think that maybe this isn't a very good idea, that maybe all of these women are just so desperate for a Cru that they just keep clicking this button, but that maybe it's not the best idea. And so, and in my case, it's especially trying if the person who's rejecting you is so different from you. You know, it's just like largely white men, high net worth individuals, and it's just coming at you, rejection left and right. I met with 64 different investors, some of them multiple times, because of course, if you do kind of move down a path with them and it's positive, or so you think, they're going to ask for more than one meeting. So, you know, you're talking about over 120 meetings with people over a long period of time. Out of all of that, I ended up with 12 investors in $1 million, pre-seed round. So that was about a 19% success rate, I think 20% success rate. And I've heard that was high.
That's actually really good.
I've heard that's phenomenal.
For a first-time founder, that is very good. I'm not sorry though, right?
Yeah, and it hurt. So that's what really threw me for a loop. The wonderful surprising thing was I really hadn't factored in the fact that VCs basically spend all day, every day listening to pitches, which makes them very good at like deconstructing pitches and very good at analyzing companies. Some of them have been doing this for a couple of decades. And so the best part of the meetings, once I kind of figured that out, was actually the second half of a meeting where I would shut up and I would ask them to poke holes in my business model. I would ask them, what do you think about the Cru? What are you skeptical about? Where do you think that this traction really matters? What are you seeing in the market, in the stratosphere that would make us successful or not? And that became really important data, really important information that helped me to figure out why the Cru would be a good investment and what was attracting investors, and also what was sowing a lot of doubt and what I would need to address if I was really going to raise the money, but also if I was just going to be a good founder, an entrepreneur, and if we were going to really take this to the next level. So that feedback was amazing.
So first of all, just to recognize that it is incredibly difficult to keep that level of engagement when you're facing so much rejection. So good for you for like hanging in there, because it does feel very personal, right? And it shouldn't feel personal, because the other side of it is these investors are seeing 1,000 pitches a year and they're saying yes to 10. So they're saying no far more than they're saying yes. And yet when you are, you're bringing your baby, this like amazing idea that you have, and you're working so hard, and it's, in some cases it's your life's mission, and then they say no, and it's so hard not to take it personal. So that's amazing. Good for you. I want to ask the question, because there really are only 42 of you out there. And, I feel like the number gets thrown around a lot, but there's a lot less information out there about what specific strategies can women of color and Black women arm themselves with to face this process. Like, is there specific advice that you would give from your experience? Like, what are, I think you already mentioned a couple, right? So you mentioned finding your like coach who understood your otherness. So that's actually net new to us here. What are some things that sorry, we had a little
earthquake. Is there an earthquake in Seattle?
No. The building just shook a little bit. Everybody's okay? We have Wi-Fi? Okay. Real time.
Let's like, the building might be crashing, but if we've got Wi-Fi, we're all good.
Okay, like I feel like we can all relax a little bit. It's very on the 14th floor. Okay, so
yes,
about that experience of fundraising as a woman of color, as a Black
yes.
woman, are there any specific strategies that you would share?
So I think the first thing I would say is that it's important to take a little bit of a step back to realize and kind of do a gut check, a reality check on what's happening here and why this is happening. Because I, thank God, did not know the statistics. By the way, they come from Digital Undivided and this study called Project Diane that really breaks all of this down. I didn't know about this before I started. So I had the benefit of being naive and not really understanding that I was doing something historic. But one of the things that became so clear to me, and I had an enormous advantage that a lot of women of color don't, that I want to talk about because it's related to the reality of our lives and it's related to economics. And people don't really talk about this. In order to get like a venture backable company off the ground, it requires an enormous amount of sweat equity, meaning an enormous amount of volunteer time for you to really make it happen. The vast majority of women like me, particularly if you're not, I'm in my mid 40s. I have 2 children. I'm a breadwinner. My family relies on my income. We have responsibilities to communities, to families. I was a breadwinner and had responsibilities even as a young professional. I was supporting my mom and my little sister. We are not people who can just get up and quit our jobs at a tech company and just devote our time kind of couch surfing, drinking Red Bull, and getting startups off of the ground. Often what's required in order for us to fulfill our responsibilities to our communities and to our families is us having money. And the primary way that we earn money is through a full-time job. Well, I am here to tell you, working a full-time job and getting a venture backable company off of the ground simultaneously is an extremely difficult thing to do. I don't know if I could do it. I don't think that I could do it. There is also a huge bias against people who try in the VC community. In other words, if someone gets whiff that you're working full-time and that you're also trying to get this company off the ground, there's a bias against you. What they will perceive is that you're not committed, that, you really aren't a founder that they should invest in because you're distracted with, these other things like a family and responsibilities. And so you have this double whammy of, I can't put in the sweat equity, I have these responsibilities, and I'm getting dinged by the venture world for having this other responsibility. And if you want to get like the greatest sense of this, you should watch this episode of Shark Tank. If you just YouTube Shark Tank and watch this episode where this beautiful sister named Keisha Smith Jeremy, who is the founder of Sanaya Applesauce, is on the show. She has a phenomenal applesauce company that is redefining the entire category. It's like applesauce for grown folks. And she's done incredibly well. She's got traction with Walmart, with Target, but guess what? She has responsibilities, and she's being grilled on this episode by the investors because they're saying that she's not committed. So I just want to kind of step back to the reality of what makes this really difficult and really hard is that you have to somehow get over that hurdle. I got over that hurdle because I have a side hustle that allows me to be a breadwinner for my family, but invest a lot of time in another entity. I'm a public speaker. And public speaking is a business that doesn't require an enormous amount of your time. You have to travel, you have to show up at an event, you have to give a speech or something. But I had a lot of time to be able to invest in the crew. And honestly, in the beginning, I would spend 60, 70, 80 hours. I would spend countless hours on trying to get this company off of the ground. So I think it's really important for us to And I know All Raise is working on this. I know that there are VCs that totally get this, like Precursor, that invested in the Cru, that are really trying to open the mindset and the paradigm and shake up the pattern matching of the VC community so that you can understand that a person that has all of those responsibilities and is fulfilling those responsibilities and is able to get a company off the ground is likely the exact founder that you want to invest in.
Right.
Those are the innovative founders. Trust me, it requires a lot of ingenuity and innovation in order to be able to get this off of the ground. Yeah. So, I would say if you're in that position, you obviously need to get help. You would need more than one Evan Cohen. You would need multiple of them. I think it's really important that you engage the community, not just on a personal level, but also on a business level. So, for example, in the very beginning, I had a lot of volunteers, who were helping me get this thing off of the ground. Over the summer that we launched, when a number of women started applying to the Cru, I naively offered a 20-minute Zoom interview for everyone who applied, not thinking that hundreds of women would apply. And so I had my personal crew members, my family, like interviewing, all of these women over Zoom. So the same way that we actually understand, if my kid needs to be picked up, I'm going to have to have auntie so-and-so or a neighbor or someone do that. Thinking about how, your company is also your baby and how your community can really engage to support you, I think is of utmost importance. But I'm also happy to talk to anyone. I'm here because people did that for me. And so, if you want to reach me, I'm at Tiffany at thecru.com.
That's amazing. I'm going to add to that because that bias towards, if you're not working at it full time, you're not committed. That comes from a place of privilege, right? So just to be very clear, the people that do that are actually not committed, right? It's the software developer who has a cushy job, earning a ton of money, and putzing around on his computer on the side, and he's certainly not committed. And I think it's important if you come across that bias to call out hey, this isn't that I'm not committed. I am committed as committed as my personal circumstances allow. And that is way more hustle that you're going to get out of that guy.
I'm so glad you said that and lean into that.
And the second thing from the investor perspective, I just want to highlight what you said about bringing people along. Even if the first thing you do might not be go pitch to an investor because you still have your full-time job, but that sell, right? That sale that you're doing, it's not just to investors, it's to employees, it's to customers, it's to volunteers. And I think that the more that you're able to bring people along before you have that investor pitch, the more that it shows that hey, this is a real living, breathing thing. And you're the, can I curse somewhere? You're the idiot. You're the idiot that's missing out on this boat. So I love that perspective and I love that advice. I really want to kind of continue down this train of what are strategies that are specific, but I think we only have 45 minutes for this forum. Do we have a ton of questions here? Okay, so we have a lot of questions from the audience. So my team here is picking up the ones that they want me to highlight first. So a tactical one. How did you prepare yourself before seeing the investors? Any tips around preparation?
So the reason why I highly recommend the Pitch podcast is because I was very nervous about not having ever been in that room at all. I mean, I'd never pitched to a VC. I wasn't sure if I'd ever been introduced to a VC. And so the reason why I highly recommend the pitch is because you're in the room. And if you listen to an episode after episode after episode, you become so familiar with the format, the questions that they're going to ask you, the responses that many different founders have given to that, the investors' response to those answers to get a really clear sense of what do they want to hear and how can you respond in a way that's really going to meet their needs. So that for sure. The second thing I'll say is that obviously the more times that you tell your story, by the way, I think the most important skill that you need to have is storytelling. Okay. The ability to provide some kind of hook at the top, to state your problem and then position your company as the solution. And by the way, the problem has to be like a big problem for a big market is so key and so important. You developing that, practicing in front of people, getting their feedback, doing it over and over and over again, I think is the most important piece of it. And then what's going to happen, and you've got to get comfortable with this, ladies, even though it's really hard, your first few pitches are going to suck. Okay. In other words, you're only going to get better as you talk to more and more investors. So obviously, if you've got like a star investor, like put them towards the end of your process, like don't have the conversation with them first. But it's the conversation and hearing the feedback that will allow you to be able to tweak your story in such a way that you're leaning in toward what you know they're attracted to as it relates to you and your company and what they're skeptical about. So it wasn't until I started actually meeting with investors that I learned that there were 3 things that investors appreciated or liked or were getting about the Cru. The first thing is what you call founder market fit. I didn't know what that was. I just know that my life's work is advancing women and girls. Well, it turns out that if you're going to invest money in a startup, it's kind of nice to invest in a founder who would have gotten up anyway to do this work every day. Not someone who is trying to make a bunch of money or was thinking in advance, let me start a venture-backed company. And that became really important. And having a founder who really understood their consumer and understood their market, because they had already been serving them, in my case, for like 2 decades, okay, of a career. The second thing that I realized people kept like listening for and kept talking about, but I didn't get in the beginning, was the word traction. Now, to me, this was just the most craziest thing because I didn't even understand why you would start a company unless you were solving a problem for a consumer. Maybe you have a product, but I didn't even understand why you would do that unless you had a consumer who was already lined up, ready to pay you. And that's in part because of my lens as an adult person who has a mortgage and has responsibilities. Like, why would I risk my children's future on a product with no customer? But it turns out that because of that pragmatism, I ended up creating this thing called traction, which is a litmus test or a proxy for a proof point that you might have some product market fit. The last thing that I kept hearing was market timing. People would say, this is great market timing, and then I would ask more questions. And what that was really about was that right now there's simultaneously this rise in women's kind of female empowerment, which is kind of funny to me because I've been working on the rise of women as empowerment for a long time, but it's really sexy now. So now I'm like kind of cool. Number 2, the US demographic shift. So one of the interesting things about the Cru is who's applying to the Cru, which is majority women of color. And when you look at the US demographic and you look at 2045 and the fact that by that time we'll be a minority white country, any brand that is attracting and creating an experience or a product where a diverse group of people feel like they can belong is going to be ahead of the curve. The third thing had to do with kind of this backlash against social media that we're experiencing right now, and the fact that any technology platform that's enabling human connection, that is bringing people together in both an online and offline experience, that's helping people to move their life forward in a meaningful, substantive way, not just kind of this superficial, I'm kind of whittling my way around on Instagram stories. It's very powerful, and that's the future. And so kind of understanding where you are and how you can play that up during the pitches and prepare yourself for these meetings only happens when you're in the process of doing it. There's this amazing quote that I love that says, "We keep waiting for the right time, but the time keeps waiting for the right us." Okay, so what I would say is stop preparing, stop planning, stop imagining what you're going to say in the meetings, and schedule the meeting.
I feel like you're talking directly to me at this point.
I am. You.
I know. I got this. That is one of my favorite things that you have ever said. I'm glad that we are recording this because I only caught half of it in my notes here. So I'm going to give you 2 more questions They're kind of an amalgamation of the themes that I'm seeing in the questions out from the audience. One is we have a few questions about timeline. Now, with the caveat for everybody listening that everybody has their own timeline. Okay, this is one example. With that in mind, and the important, it's important to say that because like some people go faster, some people go slower, and what matters is that you're standing up at the end. So with that, Tiffany, can you talk to us about the timeline from idea to that sense of traction to starting your round to closing your round? What did that look like?
You mean from the inception of the company?
However you want to describe it. We have a few people asking, like, how long did it take you from idea to launch? How long did it take you from beginning to end of the fundraise? So, like,
got it.
Tell us about what the timeline for you was.
Got it. So from idea to launch was very quick. I mentioned that I met with that woman in January. By May, I had sent out a 3-minute video to the world that said, hi, I'm Tiffany. I've done a lot of great stuff, but the secret to my success is my crew. You know, this is what they've done for me. If you need a crew, click here. So just a few months. That's in part because I have this very deep philosophy about the universe that involves a 12-month cycle. I'm basically like, if the universe blesses you with anything, a pair of shoes, a sweater, an idea for a business, you have 12 months to execute. You have 12 months to wear it. You have 12 months to do it. And if you don't, it's no longer yours. You need to give it away. You can't be pissed when somebody else launches the company and you're like, that was my idea. No, you have 12 months. So I didn't have that much time. But also I had a member of my own personal crew that really pushed me. And she was like, Tiffany, this is a great idea. What's holding you back? And I said, I don't have a team. I can't afford to hire people. And that's when she said, well, you have a crew. What's wrong with you? It's called The Cru. You have a crew. You should engage us, and you should engage a lot of people who love you and would support you to kind of get this off of the ground. So we launched in May of 2018. We accepted and onboarded our first class, our first cohort in the fall of 2018. By December of 2018, I was seeing that there were about 1,200 women, I think, on the waiting list, and I was feeling a lot of pressure. I started doing the research to figure out how to get more money. But just to level set with you, one of the resources that I found was a platform called Golden Seeds. I went to fill out the application for Golden Seeds. And at the bottom, the final question was, what is your valuation? I didn't even know what a valuation was in December of 2018. So just so you know, there was like a huge learning curve. By January, I was clear. I knew what venture capital was. I knew what evaluation was. I knew that we needed to kind of go through this process. By mid-February, I had my sponsor and I felt like I had things in place. I had a ton of meetings and I kind of secured the last investor by August. And by the way, when I say secure, I mean documents being signed, the wire, the money's in the bank, which was another thing I learned about this process. So it takes a while, even after people say I'm in, it takes a while for you to actually secure all of the resources that you need. So I don't know, 5-6 months. But to timeline, it will never take me that long again. Oh no, I learned a lot during the process. In fact, last week, I was in SF in Palo Alto meeting with investors because I want to go back out again in the spring. So in the spring of 2020 to raise my seed round. My first was my pre-seed. And I was like, I already been through this before. So I want to sit down with you. And I sat down with all of them. I said, listen, I'm not raising money right now, but I will be in the spring. And what I want to know is, based on where the crew is right now, what kind of questions will you have, right? What will inform your decision making about investing in the crew, you know, once we're raising our seed? Because I don't want any surprises. And it took me 5 months to raise the first round, and it's not taking me 5 months. So I need to get a sense of what expectations you would have so that I have enough time to potentially meet those expectations depending upon what they are. So I already got a sense last week of where investors are at and what they're going to be expecting of me. So I'll be in a much better position in the spring when I go back out again. And after we come back from the holidays, what I'm basically going to do is reach out to every investor that I'm interested in investing in the Cru. And I'm going to let them know between this day in March and this day in March, I'm going to be raising money, and I'm going to set all of those meetings up so that I'm just meeting with people back to back. And I'm really transparent about the process with all of them so that they know they have a couple of weeks to make a decision and we're going to close.
That is amazing. Like, so many good nuggets in there. I can't even pick up one. But I'm gonna call out what I do, the Female Founders Alliance, because a lot of these, like, what is evaluation, right? Like, what is the market like right now? A lot of those things are things that, like, other founders can help you with, right? So now you're a member of FFA. There's no membership fee. We're not like the Cru like that. We are purely like an online network that is free and open to any woman who is working specifically on a venture scalable company that is incorporated. You do not have to be working on it full time, because we understand that, but you do have to be committed. So what we call it as full time as your personal circumstances allow. And a lot of those questions we help demystify, give you access to people and organizations that can move your business forward. So that's our purpose for being. And I wanted to make sure I call that out, because I think that we have a lot of new people on the call. And I'm going to give one last question. Is that okay? Can I do one more? So it's a quick question, Tiffany, because we're at the end of the time. But somebody had a really good question about, I think it's a she is based in Boston. And she talks about that ecosystem being less diverse. I know that, like, Seattle, less diverse, right? Portland, very much less diverse. So what are you, if you're a minority founder, if you're a woman of color, if you're maybe LGBTQ, like, in one of these markets where you are very, very alone, like, do you have any? I know you're not in one of those markets yourself.
I know.
Any tips that we can talk about on how to navigate that specifically? Because travel is expensive.
Yes, it really is. I'm not in one of those markets, but I was born and raised and birthed in one of those markets. I live in New York, but I'm from the Pacific Northwest. I was born on a military base in Tacoma, Washington. I'm a proud University of Washington Husky. I know what it's like to be watching, Boys in the Hood or Hillman on TV and, like, be dying to want to be at a historically Black college because you're, like, in your, international baccalaureate program in your high school and you're just in one of two Black people, in the program. And so isolation is hard. One thing I will say is that these online communities like Female Founders Alliance make a huge difference because you can engage with people in multiple ways on multiple platforms. The other thing I'll say is one of the, I think, privileges I had was being a drop the ball. You talked about my book, Leslie, was being a drop the ball mom and kind of having a sense of efficiency about my life. I raised my entire round via Zoom calls. The two co-leads for my round, Peter Rojas at BetaWorks and Karen Klein at Bloomberg Beta, I didn't actually meet them in person before they invested in the Cru. So I say that to say I was meeting with people all over. I live in New York, but I didn't actually go into someone's office in New York. I could have been in Minnesota. And still been able to manage pretty effectively and efficiently the process. So I don't want you to be completely daunted by the fact that you're not in New York, you're not in SF or Palo Alto. You can still raise money. You can still get your company off the ground. And there's a whole community and a whole ecosystem of other female founders who are right here to support you in doing it.
Amen. All right. We love hearing from you so much, Tiffany. We are towards the end of our time. There's a lot more questions. I'm going to send these to you afterwards in case you want to use social media to answer some of them. I'm going to share a couple of things that are coming up, everybody. Our next forum is January 7th. So in the new year with Rand Fishkin, who is the founder of Moz, the CEO and co-founder of SparkToro, a world recognized expert in SEO, in growth marketing, and he's going to talk to us about how to get our first 500 customers. So how to build that wait list just like Tiffany did. And in 2020, we'll be heading out to a lot of those markets where you guys are sitting. We'll be in Boston, Atlanta, San Francisco, LA, New York, and Seattle to help all of you get access to the people and organizations that can move your business forward. On a personal level, I would like to wish everybody the happiest of holidays. I don't think that we will get to talk until the new year. I like to say that December is for reflecting, January is for looking forward. And it has been an absolute privilege to touch all of your businesses and see what everybody is doing. And Tiffany, I could not wish for a better final FFA event of the year than having a conversation with you. You inspire me, my friend.
Thank you. You as well. The inspiration is mutual.
Amen. All right. And the FFA team is all sitting over here and shaking their heads wildly. They adore you. And we are all sending a lot of love to everybody who is dialed in. We wish you guys the best, happiest holidays to you and your families and a happy new year. And we will see you in 2020.